What I want to do with this video is just spend a couple of minutes looking at the last part of that Mark Johnson quotation where he talks about meaning and thought emerging from our capacity for perception, object manipulation and bodily movement. I feel like I've gone over that quotation so many times now. But the last part of that quotation is this thing to do with bodily movement. So I just feel like I need to just walk through some of the ideas around that as a potential lead-in to thinking how bodily movement might play itself out in terms of meaning and thought, which is where I want to lead on to ultimately. Just to reiterate, what I've already spoken about is the way that perception potentially plays itself out, the various variables that exist within perception in all the senses, and the structures that exist within perception, how that might be used as a template. Then I've talked about the ideas of objects, along with the various complications and confusions about what an object is, and how that understanding might ultimately be mobilized as a means of understanding and talking about and thinking about things in general, meaning and thought. And the last couple of videos I talked about space and different kinds of spaces that we simultaneously occupy and some of the properties of those spaces and how that might be used to map the various concepts, thoughts, desires, feelings that we have. So here we are at this point where I'm talking about movement. And all I want to do really is just to point the way towards some of those structuring elements that movement provides, and how some of those structuring elements might, again, as I say, provide templates, provide structures, which I'll explore more fully later on with some worked examples about how meaning and thought emerge in reference to the structures provided by things like movement. Okay, so I think when we're talking about movement, we're kind of talking about two things, but they're related. It's something I mentioned in an earlier video, I think, when I was talking about motor cognition. Motor movement, more generally, there's kind of two components to it. One is what I think Mark Janero calls actions, which are really gestures. They're movements of the body, but it's a body located in a particular space in the environment, at a particular point in the environment. So action are the movements of the hands, it's the movement of the head, it's all the proprioceptive behaviours that one engages in, and that has a distinct organisation. The organisation for that is schematic. It is the various the various body schema, the various body images and body schema that we have. And that Sean Gallagher talks about so well, and I'll try and provide some quotations from Sean Gallagher to support that, but which tell us where our body is in space, what our relationship between two parts of our body is, what the relationship between part of our body and an object is. My hands are in a particular relationship to this camera that's in front of me right now, for example, and those relationships are completely organised and completely structured and consistent and predictable. If I do certain things with my hands, the organisation that's taking place in my cognition about what I'm doing with my hands is completely rational. It makes perfect sense and it's organised. The things I do with my hands in relation to the desks I'm sitting in front of, or in relation to the walls that I'm quite near, again are consistent and stable over long periods of time, and act as very effective templates on which to hang different kinds of content. And I guess here I'm just thinking back to some of the stuff that Steven Pinker talks about, which I mentioned earlier on when I was talking about cognitive metaphors. What Pinker says is that the mental frameworks, the cognitive frameworks that we have, that we develop from completely routine embodied activities, such as the actions that I'm engaged in now, provide those structures in which abstract content, other kinds of content, might be dropped and organised. So again, I'm thinking in those terms. So there's that aspect of bodily movement, which is, as I say, to do with actions. But then there's the other type of bodily movement, which is the actual physical movement of the body through space in an activity like walking or running or falling or cycling or jogging or swinging, those kinds of activities. Particularly walking. I think walking is a particularly salient one, and it's something that I have a lot of interest in. Because the body in space, the body moving through space, does something very different to the body that's static in space. A body that's static has the perspectival effects that I've talked about. It has a particular relationship to the objects that surround the space. Those objects that are in that space maintain consistent relationships. But as soon as you put the body in motion and start walking, everything changes. A whole new set of parameters come into play that become available. So if you imagine yourself walking through a forest, you're walking along a forest path, every step that you take brings new alignments between the trees. The tree that was in front of you, in a completely consistent, coherent way, begins in front of you, moves through the side of your vision, and then moves behind you. And whilst it's doing that, it's lining up with those trees that lie behind it in a completely organised geometrical way. The same with the path that's kind of slipping underneath you as you walk. The path that's ahead of you that begins subtending a certain degree of arc in your retina, it appears small up ahead, grows in a completely organised and structured way, and slips gradually underneath you in a predictable and, as I say, organised and completely invisible way. This is completely intuitive, transparent activities that's taking place. And all of the rest of those coherent events are taking place. I've been talking mostly visual, and that process is often referred to as optical flow, the flow of events past your eyes. But of course that's also taking place aurally, the sounds that you're hearing. If you're moving closer to a sound source, the sound gets louder, completely in lockstep with your movement, and as you pass it, the sound gets quieter in a completely related way. It happens to this perhaps less detectable way, but it happens to the olfactory environment that you're moving through. You move through spaces with different smells in them and come out the other side, and different things happen. And so on with all of the senses. And all the time that this is happening, it's happening in a way which is coherent and consistent. And all of those changes that are taking place, which are produced by the act of moving, and by the potential changes that can be initiated in that act of moving. You can speed up, you can slow down, you can turn around. All of that stuff is completely coordinated, is referred to and is related to the sensory changes, the perceptual changes that are taking place, the changes that you're experiencing around you in relation to objects, and the way that space itself seems to be reorganizing itself as you move through it. So again, as I've said with perception, as I've said with space, as I've said with objects, movement brings with it a series of structured, organized templates against which other kinds of content might be figured, things that we might call thoughts, things that we might attribute meaning to. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for watching.